Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock and we will start the meeting. First of all, can I ask that all mobile phones are turned off, please? You can see we got different officers here and they will be having an input into the meeting as we go along. The first thing on the agenda is apologies. Thank you. The next one is...
Councillor Paul David.
Pardon?
Councillor Paul David.
Right. Right. Second on the agenda is declarations of interest. Any? Or as we go?
That's in much, yeah.
Right. Number 3 is the public forum. We have one member from the public. Do you want to ask any questions? No? Thank you. Number 4 is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. For those who are here, could somebody propose that they're correct? Tudor? Right. Have you got a seconder? Right. Thank you. Number 5 is the Cabinet Members' work programme. Can I ask the Cabinet Member?
Thank you, Chair. In fact, what I'm going to do is give you an indication as to what my priorities are for the moment. But bearing in mind that this agenda is probably going to take us some considerable time this afternoon, and which I'll be partaking, I'll just give a précis of what my priorities are. First of all, we've got to look at the performance data and the evidence that we use in order to assess where we are and what decisions we're making. The information that we've had in the past, I don't think, is up to scratch, and Matthew Gatehouse and I have had a number of discussions as to the ways in which the presentation of data is going to be more relevant and understandable, and will give an indication as to where we are, not in relation to where we've been in the past, but also in relation to where this authority lies with other authorities in Wales. We then move on to what I mentioned in the last council meeting in July, and that's the integration of services and the backroom services. We're going to be required by Welsh Government to ensure that we work far more collaboratively with other authorities in Wales, and that's principally with regard to payroll, legal, HR, all the backroom functions we are going to have to integrate. That's going to save considerable costs so far as this authority is concerned. We mustn't lose control of what we do, but that is a requirement of Welsh Government, and I'll be meeting with other Cabinet members and authorities in South East Wales to make sure that that programme is pushed forward, because if we don't do it, it'll be imposed upon us, I'm sure, by Welsh Government. Those are my principal priorities. Following the last meeting, which I was unable to attend, there was a discussion with regard to various ICT options, and I think those alternative ICT options have been now complied with, and the various members who have not been able to take full advantage of the computer hardware that the software hardware that we've been given, have been given alternative. That's what I've been advised. Instead of having the Surface, they've been provided with the original computer.
I just haven't got mine now.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, right. Well, I understand that Councillor Watts has been provided with his.
Oh, maybe. That's right.
That's right. Unless you've got any members have got any questions at the moment.
Yes, Francis.
Thank you for that, Paul. A question about your mention of data. Are you, first of all, with particular data you're considering, or is that like all the data sets that we receive to look at performance? That's the first thing. And the second one is, when you talk about, for example, our performance comparable to other local authorities, I'm sure you will accept that in some areas that isn't particularly helpful. How do you propose that if we are going to be limited to comparing with other Welsh local authorities, that data would be granular enough for us to really look at the depth of performance? So take education as an example. It's a good one probably, because when we compare ourselves against other Welsh local authorities, it isn't really particularly helpful unless we're really going to get down to the detail on, families of schools, for example.
From my understanding, we'll be looking at the whole set of data, not just from individual sections. I think I'll pass on to Matt to explain the balance of that.
Yes, certainly. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Taylor. We all know this with performance indicators. All they are, they're a spotlight, a tin opener. They enable us to get into the discussions. And those comparisons are really important to us. We are limited in terms of comparison sometimes to Wales, because we're operating within a Welsh framework set by the Welsh Government. Some of those measures we can compare with England, sometimes we can't. And of course, you rightly highlight education as one of those areas where we would expect, because of our socio-economic position, to be one of the top performing authorities in Wales. And so it's important for us there to dig down into those other levels of data. And these are some of the things we're doing. So, well, in many cases, and members will see a release on Wednesday, there are some quite high level data items. What we continue to do is to dig down into that more granular detail. So what we hope is when reports are coming before members, yes, you will see the headline, the national performance measures, but also some of the more contextual and richer picture starting to come through to help you really understand what that means for Monmouthshire and our residents.
On that point, I'm still not clear. Maybe it's what you were trying to dig for. In terms of comparison, will we be in a better position to compare like with like? So, for example, we will not be comparing our educational attainment with Blaenau Gwent, but with Ceredigion, which actually would be a much more telling comparison.
Yes, that's absolutely right, and that is something which happens at the moment. So the reports that are brought to you by the Chief Officer for Education look at different groups of schools and compare within families of schools, and the school banding system put in place at a national level allows that to happen. So actually I think probably education is one of those examples where there are arrangements in place already to allow you to see like for like comparisons. Of course, in that area, members will be aware that the last round of cohorts, there have been changes to the curriculum in England, not least in England, English and maths, for example. So actually now in Wales, we don't have equal qualifications, or I should say we don't have comparable qualifications to England. So it does make that a little more complex for us. But we do know the authorities that we need to be comparing with amongst our cohort of LEAs within Wales.
Do you want to come in, Kerry?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. One of the points that I'd make, Chair, as well, is it's not just about looking at data in a conventional way, just linked to performance and improvement. One of the things that Councillor Jordan set a very clear stall out around is open data, for example. So using data that we don't currently make open to the public and open to different communities, putting that out there so we can actually develop different solutions to some of the problems that we have. So to give you an example, one of the things that we do open up as a data set at the moment is our procurement and our supplier spend. So every month we put all of our supplier spend out there, we make it completely open, but we do that in a format which people can use and can manipulate. And one of the things that the development community who's got hold of this data is telling us is that our spend through procurement now mainly goes to national firms and companies and doesn't actually go to local companies in the same way as it once did. So it gives us some policy observations and it gives us some hooks and some drivers to potentially change practice. Because if one of the things that this council is intent on doing is making an economic impact and making sure we support a healthy and prosperous local economy, then we've got to make sure that we are giving start-up businesses, existing businesses, local businesses, the opportunity to have a stake in the kind of markets that we create. So it's not just about the data that we see day in, day out. It's about using data in a different way, seeking that new utility for data and making sure it gives us better answers to some of the big problems that we're trying to tackle.
I think I've got to agree with Councillor Grocott. In the future, and starting this year, it's going to be so much more difficult in terms of education to make like-with-like comparisons. We won't be able to easily compare with England, where many qualifications at GCSE have gone on to the 9-1 grading, and obviously Welsh Government has stuck to A star to G, and also differences at A level. And I think it's very important that we select the sort of correct pairing, as Councillor Grocott suggested, that we are going, in a sense, like for like, to get a true comparison. There are so many things you can do with stats, and you can totally blind people with them, unless you have a good comparison. And the other thing I would say, in terms of the work programme, with all, the agenda day is very long, I just wonder with all these things, and obviously the work of this committee, I think, is at the heart of the whole process of the council, are we going to be able to get through the work with something like 4 meetings a year? I think that is slightly optimistic, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's, again, a great point, and it is agendaed later on for us to talk about. And I think that so much has happened. The landscape has changed so much. There are so many challenges and opportunities around democracy. And I think that has to be something we discuss today, because today's agenda is quite large. It's all-encompassing. There's a lot on there. We may not get through everything, in fact. But I think it's probably the real value of this committee will be the work that goes on in between. But I think you're right, Councillor Thomas, we need to give some thought and structure to organising that. Otherwise, we could be missing some valuable opportunities, I think. Now is the time to influence, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. Now, Tudor, that's the point. If we've got open data, you can look at it yourself and you can come to your own conclusion as to where we are by comparing it with other authorities. If you can see all the figures, you don't have to have them presented to you. You can look at it yourself.
To a certain extent, I agree with that. But having worked for an exam board for 20 years, for the lay person, comparing data sometimes is quite a technical task. And I think, yeah, I agree with open data. But if many people aren't familiar with it and can't make those comparisons, I think there's got to be some sort of slight steer there at times. And I agree with the open data concept.
No? All happy? Right, we can take the wire off now. Right, the next one is number 6, Members Support Service. And I think, Kelly, you were going to take
Yes,
this.
Chair, if I could take this item, please. I think last time we met, there was a really wide-ranging discussion about the purpose and the function of this committee. And I think we decided that probably the best thing to do was to think less about democratic services in terms of the administrative approach to sort of democratic services, and to really think more about some of the new directions in democracy. What does democracy mean to our people? And we just had a great demonstration of that this weekend at the USH show, with lots of members out and about, engaging with the public, seeing firsthand some of the responses of our public to certain issues and problems, and really sort of understanding, if our purpose is around democracy, how can this committee really mobilise to take best advantage of that? So there were lots of different suggestions. We talked about flat pack democracy, for example, which is on the agenda today. We talked about the local government white paper and some of the challenges and opportunities, but really we were talking about the true purpose of democracy. What does it mean in real engagement terms? How can we help it reduce some of the barriers? How can we just get, beyond the sort of usual suspects and start thinking, I think, more strategically about how we can connect with our communities? And I think some good comments were made about the value of having a meeting in this room, which feels quite formal. I think we did have a member of the public who came along and sat in the back at the last meeting. And we don't want that, do we? We don't want people just to sort of come along silently and sit in the back. We want proper engagement. And as Councillor Jordan has just set out, that is one of the key priorities for him as Cabinet Member of the Governance Brief as we move forward. So this item on the agenda really was to try and deal, I suppose, with some of the less strategic things, still important operationally, but give members the opportunity to really raise any concerns that they have, to talk about any issues, to try and tackle some of the stuff around IT, just some of the day-to-day stuff. So we've still got an opportunity on the agenda to capture some of that stuff, but making sure that the majority of the time on the agenda is really attributed to some of the big strategic issues and how this committee can sort of mobilise to address some of those things in the best possible way. So digital and technology seems to be an enduring issue, and when I asked members for some feedback about what it felt like to settle into the role, I think digital and technology was an issue that came up time and time again, mostly positive, some, I suppose, snagging and some little tweaks for us to think about. But again, at the last meeting, some great comments were received about members' training, for example. Why can't more of that be done virtually? Why can't people Skype into meetings and training? It would make the whole process much more efficient. So we tried to capture that today to have some discussion around, and we've got Sian and Kyle with us, and I'm aware as well that John and the team lend quite a lot of support in on the digital front as well. You'll be aware that we've made some changes, a bit controversial, to members' expenses in terms of the way in which you submit your expenses. And I think what John and I are trying to do is to recognise that at the moment there's a fair bit of officer capacity that's tied up in quite manual and repetitive processes, not just members' expenses, but is it the best use of officer time to have a scrutiny officer and a democratic services officer sat in committee meetings, taking notes, preparing agendas, sending out minutes, when lots of these processes can be automated? So how do we redeploy people so they can do some higher value work? And if they are going to do higher value work, what kind of work do you want officers to be doing to better support your role as elected officials? So we've tried to capture that today. I want to talk about the Council Action Planner because I'm aware it's niggly. It comes up at every council meeting, and sometimes if there are blanks or actions that are not completed, it means we revisit that whole subject. And I think the Council Action Planner needs to be iterative, it needs to be available, it needs to be a live and living document. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then at the end, really, the select committee priorities, the fact that we don't have a coordinating board anymore. So it's really incumbent upon this committee to take a much more active role in terms of that coordination and alignment that's so important. So I was just hoping that we could have 20 minutes or so to discuss some of these things, to make sure that we're all contributing to them in a fulsome way, but to make sure that we don't lose sight, however big and strategic this agenda may get in the future, and we all know some of the issues are big and strategic, we always have, I suppose, the opportunity to comment on the day-to-day stuff because it's still important that the wheels turn. So Sian, Kyle, on that note, if I can just hand over to you in terms of leading the discussion around digital and technology, and Chair, if we could just keep that to 5 minutes, if that's okay, because I'm aware we've got quite a bit to get through. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I probably best to make the distinction between technology and digital, because a lot of people think about digital democracy or digital services as being the actual equipment that you use, and it's not necessarily the equipment that you use that's the important thing. It's what you use it for. It's what you use it to make efficiencies and effectiveness, to free up our colleagues to do the brain work that a machine can't do. So rather than concentrate on the tech, although we are more than happy to talk about the technology and why we're using the particular devices we're using, it's probably better to think how the technology can enable us to work more efficiently and effectively and differently. So I'm open to any questions that you may want to have. I know that members wanted to talk about whether they have smartphones as part of their standard equipment, which we haven't given them previously. And I know some members want to talk about the actual devices that you've been handed out themselves and how you may better use them to help you in your role as councillors. So I'm open to any discussions, any questions, and Kyle, my colleague here, who is far more au fait with the technology than I am, he would probably be able to answer most of your queries on that respect. Okay, thank you.
Right, members, is there any questions you'd like to ask on what Sian have just said?
Sian, last time I think Councillor Dimmock and others asked a really important question, which was around some of the member training. And I think, Councillor Howard, you raised it a couple of times. Very difficult to make some of the training sessions when members work full time and there's a training session in the middle of the day. So there was a really important one. It was on safeguarding. I think several members wanted to attend, but again, it's not always possible. So is there something that we can do to give members an in? Is there some virtual training? I think Councillor Dimmock, you raised Skype as an issue. I think we all recognise that's probably not as interactive as we'd like, but is it great for a starter for 10? What can we do, Sian?
I'll come in on that one. We have something lined up. As you know, we put on digital literacy plan for when you all joined. We appreciate you couldn't all attend that. So something we're looking at the moment, which we're doing corporately anyway, is Skype for Business. What we've recognised so far is that not everyone's as upskilled as we'd like using Skype for Business. So what we're trying to target first is the training around that. If you have any suggestions on the best way to deliver that training to initially get you in a virtual state, then please feed back to me. And then eventually we're doing Skype rooms as well, so video conferencing facilities in the meeting rooms. And we will be moving on to the chamber as well. Something we hope to get going in the next couple of weeks is video conferencing in the conference room downstairs for the cabinet sessions. So hopefully you'll have a taster of that down there first, and then we can take it to other arenas like training sessions, where if you can't attend, you'll be able to either join virtually, or there'll be a recorded web link for you to refer back to in the future then.
Giles?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It would be helpful to have some training modules available online. I don't know if they're on the hub, or there are some things we can access anyway, because I don't know about other members. I still have trouble connecting to anything other than mail through this at home. It's not reliable. I don't understand why, but the one thing that might be helpful is, certainly at work I've had to do training modules as all members of staff have had to have done. Recently there's a 45-minute one, domestic violence, violence against women, sexual violence, that sort of thing. Done one previously about safeguarding. Those modules, you log into the council's training function, you have to sit there and watch it. You can't skip through them because it doesn't let you. So, and there's like a test, multiple choices at the. Not that I've tried to skip through them. It tells you that at the beginning, Kelly. But no, that is really helpful. There's a record then of the training that stays on your records, and I just think that would be an awful lot more helpful than some of the things we've had to, or we've been invited to attend here. And as Kelly, you noted, and it's something that will come up during the timing of meetings debate later. There's absolutely no way, even with the best employer and having civic duty leave and a certain amount of annual leave, that all of those training sessions that sometimes on different days or at different times you can attend, absolutely impossible. And as a result, you end up feeling out of the loop.
Tudor?
I just want to say, you mentioned about the use of smartphone. I live out in the sticks of it, and the issues of connection are poor with this. It's not the machine; it's where I live. But with lots of casework, sometimes people ringing you and you wanting to ring them back. I'm finding, I wish I had a phone that was, as it were, for work. I don't want to give out my personal mobile when I'm out in wherever, when I'm on holiday, that people can constantly get you like that. Certainly in my previous job, we had a smartphone, and obviously very, very useful to keep in contact with the office and for them to get you. But obviously, you were then not out of pocket. I think members are sometimes out of pocket having to use their own mobiles, use their own phone, and most people don't have a paperless bill these days. You can't highlight it off. So I think that's something we need to look at to keep contact.
Yes, thank you. I'll reply to that one. Quite some years back now, the Cabinet decided how much they were going to spend on members' equipment, members' laptops, members' smartphones, printers, print consumables, all of that sort of stuff. Obviously, we're trying to discourage any printing and print consumables being used. The issue of smartphones, for us in the Digital Programme Office, we would love everybody to be able to use smartphone technology so that you could have the My Council Services app on your phone, so when you deal with members of the community who have a particular issue or something to report, that you can actually report that on your smart devices and use the technology when you're actually out in the field. You don't always have your laptops and tablets with you when you're out in the field. However, there is a cost issue for this, obviously. The standard smartphone devices we use here in Monmouthshire are around about £80 per device. We did have a little bit of a bonus fund from EE, our telephony providers, but we've quickly used that up with upgrading some of our more mobile members of staff. Not all members of staff have mobile phones. So for us in the Digital Programme Office, we would love you to have the mobile technology. There is a cost issue. If every member were to have a phone, and I appreciate the confidentiality of not giving your own phone number out, there'd be a cost issue from the outset there in buying the devices, but also an ongoing cost issue of around about £10 per month per user, but that is unlimited use. So I guess it's probably a business case needed now, and to go back to Cabinet and decide how much of a budget this would cost. You know, the ongoing revenue cost would probably be around about the region of £4,500–5,000 per annum extra for the Democratic Services budget. However, if the actual benefits of you having a smart device and not having to give out your own personal number outweighs that, then I guess that would speak for itself. But obviously, we would look to John to probably in the first instance to sort of put some sort of a report together for that.
I'm going to fetch John in now to speak on
that. Thank you, Chair. On the phone issue, the reason why you've got those tablets is there's a phone built into it. You can set that up, you can use it, it's got access to the council's directory. We've been sat in meetings here before where Francis, as an example, mentioned being unable to get through to officers, going through reception and trying to be put through in the contact centre, etc. Whereas with the phones on your computers, you've got it there, you've got a directory, you've got numbers for every officer, you can search by name, go straight into it. I appreciate that doesn't solve your giving out your number issue, but as long as you've got an internet connection, then you have a phone that you can use, not just at home, but anywhere you like. Just coming back to Giles's point on the training modules, the WLGA were looking at online training modules that's linked to the NHS system through Learning Pool, I think it is, the all authorities training sessions. It wasn't ready in time for the induction programme, and trying to get onto it was an absolute nightmare. So if you thought our IT might have been bad, you should have tried theirs. But going online is something that we're looking at, and once it's easily usable for members, then we'll definitely pick it up and put it out there for you. But at the moment, it makes sense to do it nationally because everyone's after the same information, but it's just not ready yet, unfortunately. On videos as well, on the hub, on your members area, anything that we've been able to record in the chamber as a training session that hasn't gone on for too long because it's got an upload limit on it, they've all been uploaded to the hub as well for you to go back and look at whenever you want to. So the code of conduct training, that'll be on there. Seminars, they're going to be uploaded, so if you can't make it, the videos will be there for you.
Sorry, John just touched on it briefly. All I was going to say as well is the difficult bit we find with training as well is getting people to go in the right direction for it. There is training on the hub. As soon as you go onto the hub, there's a big green tab in the middle of the page saying help. On there's a lot of written instructions. We recognise now that not everyone likes reading through documents to snoop through the instructions, so we have put some videos on there now for various topics. If you'd like to suggest any other videos that could be on there for other topics, please do so, and we'll try and get them up there as well.
Francis?
Yeah, two things. First of all, just to say that works really well if the officers' numbers are updated on the web anyway, because that's the same way as the people when you call up and say, can you put me through or can you give me the number for? And I'm not sure that always happens that effectively, so it's not really helpful for us and it's not very helpful for the public if they're calling up. But anyway, that's just, I think that's an important issue in terms of our communication with the public. But on the issue of digital, my question is about remote access to council meetings, whatever they may be, whether it's the Democratic Service meeting here today, whether it's, so some officers, some members may be in a position where they may be in work or they may have something to do, but they may be able to leave their work for an hour in a location and Skype in or whatever. I think that's, things have moved on enormously in all other aspects, but in terms of physically being present to contribute and vote, that hasn't moved on, has it? Since like the 19th century. So that is my question. How far forward are we on that? Even if at this moment we can't do the voting thing, which I don't know why we can't, but anyway, if I was to want to contribute to Democratic Services Committee and I was at home or I was in work, how do we do that? How close are we and can we?
So we are extremely close now. I'd like to say we're closer than ever. Now you brought it up, funny enough. So it was suggested by Peter Fox, the leader now, that we do it for September cabinet sessions. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of a delay with the SRS side, but we've got the kit. It's ready. It's here this week. We hope to get it tested now with the cabinet session in the conference room, and then we can put it in the chamber as well and have other rooms with the software available as well. That'll enable, like you say, if you're in work and you had an hour free to Skype in, you'll be able to Skype in to whatever's going on in this meeting room with the presentations with it, with the ability for you to feedback via voice or text or video call into this meeting so you're virtually here.
John wants to come back in.
Kyle's the positive one, I'm the pessimistic one. Whilst the technology might be there for one person to dial into a meeting, there might not be the technology for more than one person to come in. And then you've got issues around how the chair can maintain control of a meeting. How can we stop people talking over the top of them if they've got voice access into the meeting? There's lots of practical issues around how we use the technology and whether it's got the functionality within it for us to do it properly. There's a reason why no one else is using remote attendance for meetings yet, is because it's still a long way off, I think, anyway.
Giles?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. John's hit the nail on the head for me. The reason it's not being done is for those reasons, and I understand Francis' dilemma and those of other members, but you can't have a debate if people really aren't there. The whole bit of a meeting is you bounce off people there and then, and I just think if you're going to have one person or a couple of people on a screen, it's almost like more like having a lecture, and I think, well, you might as well just send an email and ask for the information that you're looking for anyway. And I remember the one experiment, a couple of, obviously Francis didn't agree, but was it 2010, 11, we had a trial of a cabinet meeting in the old county hall with Bob Greenland on television, and it was like having Max Headroom. He might not as well have bothered because he did a bit of presentation, but you couldn't interact with that. It was a nice gimmick, and yeah, he said his piece and introduced the report, but other than that, I thought, well, you couldn't see his face on the screen, he couldn't see you, and I just think what an absolute mess of a meeting that would be to try and control that. And to my mind, I just don't see any point pursuing it.
I want to fetch Shan in, please.
as John says, as everybody says, this is really early days. But if you don't start with small steps, you're never going to get there to the bigger steps when they actually happen. We are leading the way, from most local authorities in this area. It is difficult because with voting and being able to use the equipment, it isn't quite the same using Skype as it is using this, where you press the button and the camera swings to you. But the technological advances are there. Give us a year, who knows what we might be able to do. We just need to start small, and then eventually we will get there. If we don't start at all, we're not going to get anywhere with this. And I do appreciate that the technology isn't particularly great. Sometimes you can't hear what people are saying. Sometimes people's sort of lanyards are rubbing against the microphones and you can't hear anything. Let us have a go. Let us start, and then we can develop it further.
Francis?
I was just going to say, I think to a certain extent we were restricted by our experience. I mean, I sort of been using that kind of technology where you are interacting with people over either, telephone conferences or for years, because there's no other way if you work for a global organisation. But also if you, the Wales Council of Voluntary Action been using that for their board meetings forever, because they got half the people in North Wales. And yes, it is slightly different to actually having everybody in the room. I can see why it would be off-putting if you were, sort of receiving a diatribe on screen. But I think that if we don't start trialling it at least and seeing how it works, then I think then we've got nothing to compare it to. So my question would be, is it possible for us to set a deadline for trialling this, for saying that we're going to try it at a select or a council meeting or whatever, and select, kind of work out the parameters, ensure that there's training delivered. Can we have a deadline? Can we say that we will, where are we? We're in September. Can we try it, prior to the next AGM, for example? Is there a difficulty with doing that? Because if we don't have a deadline and we're not working towards something, then I think we could probably be at another term of council before we say, we haven't actually made a great deal of progress on that.
John wants to come in.
I think the best answer to that is, let's come back to the next committee with it then, with a deadline. Because, as Carl said, the technology in the video conference room is coming in the next couple of weeks. Gives us time to trial it, set stuff up. We might even then be able to show you what it's going to look like. And then we'll have more of an indication of what extra work needs doing off the back of that to be able to then set a deadline, not set a deadline when we can be sure on sticking to it.
Carl?
I just think a couple of obvious points, really. I wouldn't want to bring you a product that is half-hearted. So like John said, give us a deadline next time, hopefully, maybe potentially in the next cabinet session, we never know. But we need to test it ourselves and make sure that those dynamics of the meeting run as smoothly as possible, because it's new to us as well. Also, the technology in this room, this is outdated now, 6 years old, or however old it is now. So the technology that we're bringing in now is hopefully a lot more advanced and can be controlled a lot better. So fingers crossed. And obviously the technology only works as good as how skilled the people are. So that's a challenge for us, to try and get you as upskilled as possible, so you're in a position to know what's going on and to be able to manage the technology.
Sorry.
So if I could just make a few comments there, because I think some of the points that you've raised as members this afternoon are not insurmountable things. Training online, better use of Skype, being able to access things remotely. I mean, these things are not huge things. And the reason why I parceled them on the agenda in this way is because, as I said, they're operational stuff that, we should be able to work through some of this stuff relatively easily. So I completely understand that the issue around remote access isn't perfect. It isn't likely to be perfect in the near future. We've got to start somewhere. Even if it isn't perfect, let's work with it and see how we can iterate and develop it into something that is more fit for purpose. So, okay, we may bring this back to a next meeting, but we've already discussed this afternoon that we need more frequent meetings of this committee. Leaving this to the next 3 months and making a recommendation and then implementing it is not really good enough if we need to bring these things into faster focus. So I'm happy to go with it, but I think there needs to be a clear time frame around all of the things that we've discussed already this afternoon. Because if we're going to really tackle some of the big strategic issues that we talked through last time, some of this smaller stuff really needs to be there in order to enable us to do that. So at the end, when we talk about online training, smarter training, potentially a business case, a return on investment around use of smartphones, remote access, voting, I expect to see some clear timeframes established around this so we can make clear progress over the next few weeks and months. That's the kind of timeline I'm thinking about this for.
David.
Thank you, Chairman. The only thing that goes through my mind is how much research are we doing about what is going out there in the market at the moment? Not only talking to the manufacturers of the equipment, because they must be looking at a large number of applications, because as we've said, it is being used for various ways of conferencing. And perhaps the other thing we ought to be looking at is users, to try and find out what users are out there. You could probably get that through the manufacturers, or perhaps maybe through certain magazines and that sort of thing, where you could raise the issue in an article for Monmouthshire County Council, etc., about this is what we intend to do in the next stage of our democracy, and invite people who are already using the equipment to speak to us and give us some guidance on what there is. So really what I've said is, what are we doing to be proactive with the manufacturers? What are we doing to interact with users that are out there at the moment? I do remember, but the first time I had a go at this was in the Cadbury's factory up in the Midlands, and it was speaking to somebody in New Orleans, and I thought it would never ever work. And we had an open forum, and it really did. But you had in the middle somebody who controlled it, almost like you with your style and panache, Chairman, in the middle, who really had a rein on the thing. If it started to go out of kilter, he could do that, and he also controlled who was called. So it is there. I know it's out there, and it would be a really interesting journey to explore that. But Kelly, you're probably miles ahead of me on that, I would have thought.
Thank you, David. Sian, do you want to come back in?
There's quite a lot in there then, wasn't there? I think the first point I'd like to make is Cadbury's probably have a lot more money than us. Something with the systems that we bring in to Monmouthshire have a key focus around standardisation and collaboration, and having one system for everything. With the technology we're bringing in, it's one of the market leads, it's Microsoft, it's Office 365, which we're going to be using an awful lot more over the coming 12 months. It fits in line with all of that package, and what users want is simplicity from what we've heard so far, and it is simple. So I guess that's hopefully answering most of your question.
Could I just respond to that? It wasn't actually a matter of cost and what Cadbury's were able to do. It was actually identifying a supplier, a possible supplier that would work for them and for us. And we knew who we wanted to speak to, and we gave them the details of what we wanted, and they put the equipment in for us to be able to use and effectively experiment for. So it wasn't a case of money, it was just what I was trying to say. We went on a bit of a journey to explore what we could do.
I'll fetch John back in though.
There's a couple of elements as well you need to think about as this, because what we tend to be getting the conversation mixed up here is video conferencing or remote attendance, and they're two completely different things in the context of what we want of a meeting of the council. And you've got to add into that as well the streaming. The streaming is the requirement that we will have to do. Remote attendance isn't. how can we got to factor in how we can output the input from remote members as well, because otherwise people are going to be watching a streaming at home. They're not going to have a screen, and we might not have a feed. So it's a really complex feeds and channels coming in and going out. Like I say, if there was someone out there already doing it, then you could be sure that the Assembly would have it in place. You'd be sure the government would already have it in place. But it's not as easy as it sounds, or as simple as video conferencing.
Do you want to come in, Kelly?
If I can, just to propose, Chair, to move this item along, because I'm sure we could talk about digital and technology for the remainder of the afternoon. If we as officers can go ahead, along with a Cabinet member, and draw up a bit of a plan for some proposals that we can bring in front of the next meeting of the committee, which won't be 3 months away, hopefully, because I think we've all agreed there's a significant amount of work to do in between meetings as well as during meetings. And we can put some time frames and some clear actions to some of this to give members the assurance that we are moving things forward. They may be difficult and others may not have done them yet, but we're going to dip our toe into the water, gain confidence and try some of these things out. We can trial and we can prototype things. If they don't work, then we'll try something else. So if that would be acceptable to members, we'll work with the digital team, John, myself, Matt and the Cabinet member to try and move this along, Chair.
Right, members, you've heard what's been said here this afternoon. To sum up, on the first one was the smartphone. Do we agree that we take it to the next council? Or our next meeting? Sorry, Chair. Go on.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just intervene. I think all of those things that we just talked about in terms of online training, remote access, being able to access some of the training courses differently, perhaps looking at a business case for the use of smartphones, because as I said, there has to be a clear return on investment over and above what we have at the moment. If we can put those together into a bit of a plan, and then gradually we can develop the business cases around those, but this committee is responsible for overseeing the progress against those things. So all of those items we've discussed under digital this afternoon, we'll package those up with some clear actions and bring them back for your future approval with that clear timescale.
Right, members, do you agree on what's just been said? And we fetch it back at the next meeting. With a yes, clear working pattern. The next one is you.
Just very quickly, I'll tie these all of these together in the interest of making progress. We spoke, members, last time about the future role of member support. We talked very much about meaningful democracy. And how perhaps we could support you in your role in terms of some of the ambitions and some of the aims that you had. You'll be aware that we've made some changes to the process for claiming your expenses, which I think has been okay. It's much more streamlined, much more efficient. I think we had a couple of initial teething problems, John, but we got over those. So I think the question we pose back to you as members is, if we're freeing up officers' time from these manual and repetitive processes and we want officers to do higher value work, how can we use some of that resource to sort of enable you and to facilitate some of the things that you wanted to do? John and I put that question out on behalf of the Cabinet member. I only had about 3 or 4 responses from members in terms of the new kinds of things you'd like to see those roles doing. Yes, you did, Councillor Taylor. Yes, you did. So just to get some feedback on that, really, because I think it ties very much in with some of the statements and some of the goals that you articulated at the last meeting. So if we could just have a couple of minutes to think about that, that would be great, Chair.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet member want to come in on this?
No, I'm here to listen.
Oh, right.
I'm here to listen at the moment because
Right.
I'll be making notes and see what you want to do.
All right. Giles.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick suggestion, and it's been an interesting experience for me to go back to being a backbencher now, because I must admit I've never felt so out of the loop and so uninformed. And just little things I wonder. Yeah, welcome to the club. And okay, yeah, part that's my own fault, it's my own time limitations, but I think it would be helpful, maybe just once a fortnight, every couple of weeks, just to have a roundup of things that might be of interest to members. And I'll give you an example. Somebody said Tom James had left in Abergavenny, he's retired or whatever. I didn't know that. I would like to have gone and had a chat and thank him and wish him well. I didn't know that Rachel Jowett was going. It was a community council Clark told me about it, and I said, oh, I don't know, I'll see if I can find out. And just little things like that. Maybe just like a round robin email once a fortnight, just to let us know what's going on, would go a long way.
Yeah, anyone else agree with that? Is there anything else we could do with that kind of a round robin? And just aware the item I've noted here is the coordinating board. Obviously, agreement was had at the last meeting of the coordinating board to disband it. And I think we've got to think about an enhanced role for that committee and perhaps taking on some of the work that committee did to share information, close that feedback loop, make sure that we're talking to one another, communication always comes up. Is there anything you think that we could add to that to enhance it?
Over to you, members.
I mean, we're not talking a newsletter or anything as onerous as that, but if you headline stuff, are there any other thoughts on it? Sorry, say that, sorry.
We don't seem to get the PR feedback as regularly as we used to, where the council have been in the paper, and in the past, Rob Webb and I can't remember, but they used to put something together for us as well, didn't they? And just little things we've got to have a flick through. Yeah, it's of interest, noted, and maybe add that to it.
Did you want to come in?
Just to agree with the councillor behind me, really, I think it would be useful to have some sort of very brief bulletin board or whatever. I think it's always difficult to decide what goes in and what goes out, isn't it? Because if it becomes overlong, people are not going to have the time or the inclination to read it. But I think we should think about that sort of information feeding to 43 councillors. It's quite a reasonably sized authority, so that people know what's coming up or what's happening.
Francis?
I also think, and this is much harder to deal with because it's related to this issue. I think to a certain extent there's also a cultural shift possibly in terms of in making sure that officers understand the value of advising a member when there's something happening locally in an area, so that they can first of all be aware of it and advised and play a role in either disseminating that information, helping, depending on what it is. And I still find on quite significant issues that doesn't happen as a matter of course, shall I say. So I think there's a bigger issue there. It's a bigger cultural issue that where officers do think, oh, have I told the local member? Could they be useful? And I've had a couple. There are always stuff that you think, well, it would have been really helpful if someone would have told me about that. It's not the kind of thing that can come in a bulletin, really, but it is more of it's just a wider point that, about what can we do to remind and encourage officers to consider to what extent have I engaged with or just as a courtesy informed local members, because they should be playing a big role in passing that information out to the community and getting feedback, so just I add that because I think that's my biggest frustration rather than picking up on some of the...
So I suppose a question for John as well and Sean, in terms of using the member pages on the hub, if we had some kind of facility for a bulletin, for a what's on, so officers could sort of upload what's going on in specific services and areas, and if there was opportunities to feedback on communications and to have something a bit more proactive around communication generally, is that something we could use and develop? And you could all contribute that. It would have to be two-way, not just officers giving information, but information coming back in. That sounds like something we could do quite straightforwardly, John.
I was thinking of democratic services having a role in communicating with all our officers to talk about, are you updating your stuff on the hub? Are you updating your contact details? How is anybody meant to get in touch with you if you're not particularly members?
Well, there's no reason why those pages wouldn't belong to Democratic Services as a committee in terms of you've taken some ownership of doing that coordination, that alignment. It would be a great thing as well to, I suppose, post some of the outcomes of these meetings. If we're serious about making real progress, it would be a good, rather than just putting minutes out there, it would be a good opportunity to share that information and to make it open in the spirit, in which the Cabinet member was talking earlier on.
My concern about the discussion about extending democratic services is that maybe we don't do the ones we've got very well sometimes. I know that they're chasing times for local government in a sense, and having made the jump from having at one time been a senior officer to now being an elected member. Back in the days when I was an officer, there were just simply many more staff around to do things than there are now. So I'm entirely sympathetic. But the reality is that the last 2 emails I've sent requesting information, I've had to send a second email before I've even had an acknowledgement. An issue that was raised with me by a member in my ward back in the middle of summer, I've still not had a response from an officer. And I think before we look into extend things, I think we ought to make sure that the things we're supposed to be doing now, we do better than sometimes we do.
I think there are 2 separate issues there, and that's something for me to think about, isn't it? If you're not getting timely responses from officers, then clearly I need to take that up through the right avenues. But in terms of not perhaps extending your role, but just making sure that we've got information out there in a proactive way, which encourages others to engage, I think is something, it needn't be resource intensive, and hopefully in time it would look after itself. But I certainly think if you're looking for better communication, better flow of information, and Councillor Howard, you make a really good point. Yes, there are some quite significant departures you as members need to know for the very practical reason that you raised at the front end of the meeting. Sometimes you're chasing people who are simply not here. So, some of this stuff just needs to happen. And as I say, I don't think the approach needs to be resource intensive. I think we can crack some of this stuff really, really quickly.
John wants to come back.
Yeah, Kelly's going down the right avenue with updating the members area of the hub. We'll have a think about how best we can do it to automate itself. So like you say, officers can upload the information themselves rather than us go chasing. But if members are having issues with officers not getting back to them, then please come through us, let me know, or let the members secretary know. If we don't know about it, we don't necessarily know that you're not getting the responses you need, and at least we can keep a log of where it's going.
David?
Yes, just simply the thing about officer movements are one thing, but we ought to know about things like somebody who's so significant in our operation, like Rachel disappearing, is really important. We should know about that. And we should also be given the comfort of knowing who's going to be replacing her. Big shoes to fill, but we should know about those things. I think mainly, really, you could have it split into something like a notice board. Weekly, fortnightly, I don't know. Something that crops up, and it could be under personnel, or it could be whatever. But just a simple thing, day-to-day simple things that you should know, and very often we don't know. There are times when you feel slightly, other guys could say how they feel, but there are times you feel you're struggling to stay in the loop a little bit, put it that way. And that isn't helpful when you're trying to chase something down. And the other thing I would say as well, and it's a thing that I don't understand from some of the job descriptions that people are given, what they do. It isn't really the simplest of things. I mean, it should say what's in the can, if you like. Heinz tomato soup is a simple thing to understand. Some of our job descriptions are, obscure, to say the least.
Okay, we'll note all of that, Chair. Thank you very much for your contribution, Councillor Dovey.
Kelly, do you want to move on?
Yeah, just the last one then, because we've talked about the select committee stuff, and I think, you know, this committee is going to have to embrace an enhanced role around some of those things that coordinating board did. I think we acknowledged that last time. The last issue really is around the council action planner. I know you've all made some comments around the work and the meeting planner, which is now up to date, and we have that working effectively. But in terms of the council action planner, just a very simple suggestion around this one, members. We tend to have the council action planner that goes back in the council minutes at every council meeting. And I think what we're going to suggest is that whilst that will stay on the agenda for noting, that we upload that council action planner to the hub. It becomes a live dynamic document. Members can look at it any time. It can be updated on a much more dynamic and fluid and ongoing basis. So rather than having a big debate about it at council meetings, we can just take it as read. These things are getting done. Issues can get then raised by exception, and we have a much more, as I say, fluid process to it that enables us all to see in a very clear and open way where things are at. So if you're happy with that suggestion, I think a number of you have raised some issues previously, I think that feels the best way to crack it. And I know John and the guys have made some progress on doing that. So it is available, it is up to date as I speak, so everybody is able to access it. Is that okay?
Any questions? No?
Great.
Right, the next one, Kelly.
No, we can move on. Paul, that's you.
Chief Executive.
I feel like giving Councillor Howard a crutch or a sweet. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully this report is reasonably short because I know you've got other items to consider. One of the requirements of this organisation is that we have a statutory head of democracy. It's a post written in law, albeit, I guess, as you would anticipate in this organisation, we're not rich enough in terms of numbers to have a dedicated anything. Particularly. It's a role that until, I suppose, well, just before you were elected in May, a role that was discharged by Will McLean, who is clearly now your Chief Officer for Children and Young People. My recommendation to you, and it's a recommendation that I need to make to you as a committee, which if you're content with will be transmitted onwards to full council, is that one Ms Byrne, who appears to have acted into the role with some gusto, certainly from my observations over the last half an hour, is a good fit for the requirements of this role. In the report before you, you'll get a sense of what the role is for, but effectively it's a guardian of the democratic process. It's an individual charged with helping you as members and your colleague members to be able to access this council and your communities in a way that you consider to be appropriate for 2017 rather than perhaps 2020, 25 or indeed the year 2000. The agenda is quite a big one. It's been interesting, just as I say, to listen over the course of the last 15 to 20 minutes to some of the conversations that you're in anyway. And for the agenda to have a chance, I think, of operating smoothly for you over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, I think I need to place an officer of some significance in this role. You'll remember, or you will be aware, that Kelly now carries the title Deputy Chief Executive. Law prohibits me providing the role, so she is genuinely the very best option for any number of reasons that I can suggest to you. So, Chair, my recommendation to you is that you give consideration to Kelly Byrne being the nominated statutory officer for the democratic process. If you indicate that you're comfortable with that, then, as I say, there is an onward transmission to council. That's it.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Yes.
I'm more than content to make this appointment, but at the same time I'd ask for a bit of joined up thinking here because in days gone by, when I spent much of my time in schools and as an inspector of schools, one of the things we were very keen to look at and indeed to report on was how young people were being prepared for life in democratic Britain. And I think there is a role here for liaison with EAS or with Will McLean to see how the democratic process in its broader sense is being promoted within schools, and our young people are being actively encouraged to become full democratic citizens in their community. So yes, it's a good appointment, a great appointment, but I'd just like to see a bit of joined up thinking so the education side links in with it.
Back in, Chief.
Thanks, Councillor Crowcutt. Hopefully, if you decide to support my recommendation today, I don't think it's in conflict with anything that you've just said. Indeed, I would suggest that the current Chief Officer Children and Young People, having previously performed this sort of role, is probably very well placed to support you in his new role also. It won't be lost on you either that clearly one of the other roles that Kelly performs in the organisation is that she's a core member of the strategic leadership team, and as such she has influence over all of the agendas of the council.
Thank you. Any other questions to the Chief Executive? No? Are you all in favour that Kelly is appointed to this position? A show of hands, please. It's passed. Right. The next item is item 8, and it's flat pack. It's an example of Monmouth.
Thank you, Chair. It will come to, I suppose, no surprise for me to point out that I'm probably not the best representative of Monmouth to be here, and just give you a little bit of an explanation before moving into a couple of slides. When the committee last met in June, we were joined in the public gallery by an expert on participative democracy. Myself and Kelly met with her afterwards, and we were brought up to speed with some of the developments that had happened in Monmouth with a movement called Flat Pack Democracy. And the original intention had been to receive a presentation about the approach and some changes that had happened within Monmouth Town Council. There have been a few changes in the makeup of the administration in Monmouth, and consequently it was felt by the Mayor of Monmouth and Anne Topping that had been at that committee that it probably wasn't the right time to bring that presentation forward. So, Chair, and with your permission, this has sort of come about since the agenda has been circulated. So without wishing to lose the momentum of the initial paper that you received on new directions in democracy at the last meeting, that perhaps I sort of put together a few slides to continue that discussion, keep the topic fresh in people's minds, with a view to having Monmouth return to the meeting at a future date. So, Chair, if that's permissible to the committee, I've got a few slides I'd be willing to share.
You happy with the slides to be shown?
That's great. Thanks very much. Kelly, I was just explaining about the situation in Monmouth at the moment, and so rather than lose momentum, that the intention was to put up a couple of slides to continue the discussion on participatory democracy, with a view of perhaps members representing Monmouth and the work that's been going on there return at a future date when it's more timely. So I wouldn't anticipate this being a particularly long item, but of course the extent of the discussion and debate that follows it is down to yourselves as a committee. So just looking to do really was start with a number. I quite like numbers, I deal with them a lot. 21%. This is the Democratic Services Committee. Any thoughts on what 21% might mean in this context?
Only 1 in 4 people go out to vote?
Actually, that could well be it, although it's not the one in this particular case. I don't have that statistic to refute it. Actually, that's the figure, the proportion of people in Monmouthshire who feel they can influence decisions in the local area. And as a Democratic Services Committee and as officers of this authority, I think that's a figure that we need to reflect on. And actually, I'll come on to this in future, but actually, in Welsh terms, that's pretty good. We're the 3rd ranked authority in Wales. We have the 3rd highest level of people who feel they can influence things that are going on here. But actually, just think of the legacy of this committee in 3 or 4 years' time, when that figure is run again and it's part of a national survey for Wales, if that figure were markedly higher. So sort of participative democracy. I guess the notion is that if people are involved in democracy, they have far more ownership. They can make sure that decisions are implemented. But also, and I think this is probably crucial, at a time when this authority is dealing with complex challenges of a nature not really seen probably in local government in the post-war period, it can really lead to residents have a far better understanding of the key issues and also the sorts of choices that are facing elected members. So just a little bit of sort of policy context. We've got the white paper out at the moment, Reforming Local Government Resilient and Renewed. And there's got some quite strong policy drivers in there for a sort of refreshing of the local democratic arrangements. So local government having a key role in helping communities to define the futures to which they aspire. At the last meeting, you had the presentation, I think, on some of the findings we'd had out from the Our Monmouthshire exercise to prepare the wellbeing assessment. And one of the other things that white paper sets out is council supporting and encouraging local communities to participate in the demographic process. And that ties in fairly well with another key piece of legislation that came into effect last year, which is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the importance that involvement of local people plays in public services, reforming, framing those choices and understanding how we move forward. Yeah, so there's a lot in that paper, and I know people would have seen it previously, but rethinking the relationship with town and community councils, more place-based partnerships and more place-based working. And I know some of this will be familiar to you. Cabinet passed a report recently that would bring together our partnership team and place-based team to really reintegrate or to reinvigorate that area of work, giving far more local involvement to what happens in perhaps what's traditionally been seen as a more formal partnership environment. So I said we were 3rd best in Wales in terms of the proportion of people, and those are the figures there. I'll share these slides afterwards for people that want to see the detail, because I appreciate the font is a little small on the screen there, but ahead of us are Conwy and Cardiff in terms of influence. And I won't mention the ones at the bottom there, but I'll send it round to you. I wasn't going to mention that, but yeah. So it ranges from Conwy at the top through to Blaen y Gwent at the lower end of that scale in terms of influence.
Matthew, are you happy to take questions as you go along?
Yeah, if the chair's happy, then I'm happy.
Okay, I was interested in this one, and the cynical part of me said, I wonder what the percentage is for members who feel that they can influence things, but have that one another time. But no, the serious question, the chart there, in terms of influencing local decisions, what sort of decisions are we talking about? Are we talking about simple things like somebody says something about a planning application, they didn't get their way, so now they're cross and they don't feel as though they can influence anything? We're talking about wider... It goes back to the comments about data earlier. In one sense, it's meaningless unless we know why the people are feeling disenfranchised and why they can't have a role. So that'd be useful to know a little bit more.
Yes, and it's a self-defined question in a sense, because this is all part of the national survey for Wales, which is commissioned and carried out by the Welsh Government, rather than local work where we're fully in control of the agenda. To a certain extent, it depends on the ears which it went into, I think, as to how people interpret that question. So some people will automatically think of their local councillor, others may think of a community councillor. For others, it may be involvement in a governing body or some other societies locally. So I think it is that notion of self-defined, but probably all of us would probably share a view that the higher that percentage, probably, and the greater sense that local people feel they can influence, we're part of that. We might not be in its entirety, but a higher figure there clearly does move us towards a situation where, you know, we're some way towards that vision we have, that purpose of building sustainable and resilient communities where people feel they have that influence and they're able to go out, get involved and make things happen in the local area.
Rogers?
And you know, the other point to mention in terms of the importance is it goes back to that point of challenges and why a more participative form of engagement really stands us in, gives great potential for us here in Monmouthshire, is the amount of social capital we have. You know, we know the quality and the skill base of the population of Monmouthshire, and that when we go out, when we talk to them, when we engage with local residents, the quality of ideas and contribution that come forward. So the notion of sort of opening up our doors and being able to collaborate and work more closely with those in the local community really has the potential to pay dividends for us. So participative democracy, I mean, this is mentioned in Kelly's paper on New Directions in Democracy last time out. But it's really about giving opportunities for members of the population to make contributions to decision making. And also thinking around sort of social justice and equality, but actually broadening the range of people who've got the access to those sorts of opportunities, not just those who have a loud voice or understand how the system works, but they're able to open up those opportunities to everyone in our communities. So just a sort of very brief example, and people may be familiar with this. It's the Paris experience. And 3 or 4 years ago, there was a new mayor in Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who set an ambition to move Paris towards participatory budgeting, where the people of Paris would decide how the money was spent, or certainly a proportion of how the money was spent. And I'm not sort of standing here or sitting here before you today advocating for that exact model, but I think it is a good example of what can happen when some of the decision-making and involvement is opened up to local people. Because France introduced a participatory budgeting program. And in the first year, I think they had something, and there wasn't a scope at that point for the public to get actively involved. They were voting on pre-issued proposals, and they had something like 30 or 40,000 people involved, and give a preference amongst those ideas. But within 2 or 3 years of people actually starting to see how their views were shaping how their politicians spent the money and prioritised projects within Paris, participation had increased fourfold. And actually, alongside the ideas that were coming forward from the administration, Paris received something in the region of 5,000 suggestions from its local residents that were voted on and put forward into the policy agenda. Yeah, and thinking around that sense that, you know, we're in complex times, we're dealing with complex challenges. we know sometimes when we're dealing with societal challenges, it's very hard for people to get involved in this sort of thing. And again, thinking about the equalities aspect, if you don't know where the next meal is coming from, or you're struggling to to put food into the children's mouths or heat the home in winter, it's very hard. So you can't consider these things in isolation. They are part of that equalities agenda, ensuring that we seek to sort of raise incomes across the board. But actually, when that opportunity is there, people will take it and they will contribute towards building better communities and sharing with us their knowledge and experience. So a couple of sort of lessons from the Paris experience. It's quite hard to manage that many ideas, and I know when we did similar things a few years back with our own budgeting experience. What do we have, Kelly? We had 100 or so, we had 100 plus ideas from our local community, and we know as officers how difficult it is to manage that sort of process, that flow of information, and keep people satisfied. The other thing to bear in mind, I mean, Paris took a very digital approach to this. And digital is only part of it. We know that not everyone is online. Some people are digitally excluded. There are lots of different ways of interacting, and not least with the meetings. And we heard earlier on potentially some of the challenges of democracy being electronic. So you need to supplement all of these engagement activities and think really hard about how we deliver engagement in the local community, and we've got some good experience there. But also sort of recognising that while people are expert in their own lives, they still need some sort of nudges and framing if we're to ask people to think around some of the bigger challenges and some of those bigger things that we're grappling with as an organisation and as a council. One of the things we've got here, and I'm not necessarily sure if today is the right time for a full demonstration of this platform. I know it was mentioned last time, but I'm very conscious of the time and the number of things you've got on the agenda. But for new members who are not aware of it, this is something we've played in the past. It's our digital engagement platform, Monmouthshire Made Open, where members of the community can raise challenges and also offer up opportunities and potential solutions, which then we as a council and other public services can look at and evaluate and understand if there's things in there. But also recognising when the things that come up are perhaps not part of our policy agenda or not the things you would be prioritising as members. They may be things that would still make a difference locally. And that more participative approach to local engagement, where people can come together and work to solve local problems, potentially has some value as we move to a situation where our resources as public bodies are declining. And communities, in a sense, are doing far more for themselves, developing opportunities and also sometimes starting to fund and deliver those opportunities locally. And also recognise in terms of this sort of involvement and more participatory approach, you've got to recognise that it's not always appropriate, and some decisions are better suited to this way of working than others. So there's the difference when actually the public has got the expertise and experience, matters about well-being, things in their own lives and their own communities, from perhaps technical discipline where that sort of knowledge is needed. And also separating out the issues which are perhaps more practical and pragmatic from ones where there are strongly held views that are unlikely to be swayed by statistics or evidence. And that could be things like matters of faith, where people will have a view and actually that view is set and is unlikely to be shifted by others' perspectives. So in terms of kind of bringing forward today, Kelly, I'm not sure if you've got anything that you'd want to add into that. And I appreciate it was a bit of a run through, but it was really just not to lose the opportunity to keep this area of refreshing and new directions in democracy on the agenda, after it was decided that the original presentation would perhaps better deferred for another occasion.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah.
Over to you, members. Yes.
Well, I'm very keen on the idea of actually getting this committee out of this chamber. That was definitely something I said last time as well. I started getting involved in council work through being a member of SACRA, and that doesn't meet in this way, and it does have other participation from different people in the community. And I really think it would be very useful for us to also get out of Usk and go into the more outlying areas, Caldecott, Chepstow, Abergavenny, and see where else we can get to actually take the discussions to the people, because I really don't believe they're all going to come here.
Giles.
The idea of participation is a great one in principle, but such a wide scope. We've gone from examples that are quite feasible and we've done before to some degree, and we've gone out and met in the community, we've varied the times of meetings, we've met in different places, we haven't always had the sort of response we expect, or it hasn't made any difference. Not to say we shouldn't keep on trying that. And then the Paris example, it's all about managing expectation, isn't it? And for me, what I'm told on the doorstep and was told on the doorstep are things about roads being in a terrible state, people not wanting any more houses built at the end of their road, yet the roads are getting in a worse state and we're building more houses at the end of their road because, for example, we have to fund areas of the council services that people never see. And it reminds me of something that Roger Harris said a couple of years back when we were talking about budget setting and political priorities, in that for 95% of what we do, probably, and if you stark political differences between us and the Labour Party, 95% of things would carry on as they were, the differences in the 5%. So that bit about expectation, when we tell people we want them to participate, and maybe nothing comes of that, or they participate and things don't happen that they want to happen, I'd hate for us to go out there again with a great scheme and tell people we're all ears listening if we can't deliver that, and set ourselves up to fail. And what I'd really like to know is, are there other examples of great participation? I mean, going back to Graham Down's Lego blocks years ago, I dare say there were lots of Lego blocks for pretty flowers, no potholes, great leisure centres. Probably weren't very many Lego blocks for children with brain injuries or looked after adults, that type of thing, because people aren't aware of them. So are there any really good examples of sustainable participation in democracy, or is it similar things being rehashed and reworded to try and deliver what we haven't yet been able to do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different examples around the globe of where these have started to make a difference. I think very few I've come across where they've shifted whole systems, but actually they make a difference at the margins. And one of the things we sort of learn is actually, change tends to start often at the margins, where sort of great concepts grow and change. And one of the probably areas we look at when people get involved in local democracy and getting more involved in community life is perhaps not always our resources and how our resources are allocated, but actually how those time commitments that people themselves give can be used and harnessed for community good. So actually, to look at an example locally, the work of someone like Owen Wills and the A County That Serves programme, and work that's happening with the likes of Ashley Morgan up at Mardy Park, bringing far more people into the community. So sometimes that participation is about realising those other resources that are out there over and above that which we have, which for the most part, Councillor Howard, as you point out, a lot of that is fairly committed, and there are not too many radical shifts you can do. Actually, there are some radical shifts we can do, but there are some set things we have to do as a local authority. We have to make sure the roads run. We have to protect vulnerable people. There's a lot more resource out there that contribute to building far stronger and more resilient communities and making a big difference. And if we can work with people and make them realise how much of a difference that their efforts can have if they work together and work alongside, and we can just help them from time to time with a little bit of funding, a little bit of guidance, then you can start to see some big things happening locally within the resource base that we've got.
Just to add to that, I think we've got to be clear as well that engagement doesn't mean solving people's problems or coming up with the answers they want to hear. Sometimes they just want to hear honestly from us why we can't do something or why we can't promise and commit to something, because, you know, we all know our context, our situation. And I think it may be as simple as just picking a theme or an issue. So when I looked at the results of the members' doorstep survey, some of the information and data you fed back from your period of canvassing in May, the top issue was road safety and speeding. Now, it may be that's public perception of one of the things that we do, and you might be right, you know, public perception may not immediately go to I don't know, adults with learning disabilities, for example, because not everybody is cited that the council has a role in providing for those things. But if, for example, you picked road safety and speeding, I mean, what we assume is the right thing to do as a council is to put speed limits in communities. Is that the most effective thing to do? I know that for me, the most effective thing that I do when I see a speed sign is when I go up onto the heads of the Valley Road and there are all those signs on the road from Costain saying, my daddy works here, slow down. That's the kind of thing that has an impact on my behaviour. We know, again, at the Economy and Development Select Committee last week, there was conversation about a new local development plan, having to review our current plan. Now, whenever we have meetings about housing growth, you can rest assured that you'd have this chamber filled 50 times over with people turning up to say, we don't want housing. Well, I can tell you there are 5,000 people on a housing register who really need housing, but we don't seem to listen to them, or we don't seem to sort of galvanise them to be able to hear their voice. So I think maybe if we're serious about progressing this, officers and the committee, then maybe we have to pick an area and think about how we make some progress on it.
Thank you, Chairman. Last year, when Sarah was chair of the Economy and Development Committee, we had this idea of going out to businesses and asking them to come in to us to a breakfast, you know, which was a fairly simple idea and something one would have thought that we could have done pretty well. And we would know where we were good to sow the seeds for these people to come in. What happened was, and the one thing I learned out of it, was that we had a shed load of people come in who were either running bed and breakfast, small hotels, or doing niche things like jams, whiskies, some vineyards, and that sort of thing. And we had one industrialist. And he got to know about the meeting simply because he met somebody in the street who said to him, are you coming to our meeting, whatever. And then he phoned every business that he knew in the Newhouse estate in Chepstow. And nobody in that estate at all knew that this meeting was going on. So it wasn't even a case of us knowing the people, but knowing the issues they wanted to raise. It proved to me that within my patch, anyway, larger Chepstow, nobody came from Calder conferences, and it was supposed to have been put out all around the place. Nobody came at all. So it isn't a case of speaking to people who might influence things for us or ask us how we can influence them. We don't even know, we don't have a good enough idea of the people that we should be talking to if we want people to influence our economy or suggest policies that would help them become more prosperous within our community, earn more, grow their business, more employment, and all that sort of thing. So this is a fairly big question, and I would suggest it is a really serious bit of work that we should be looking at in defining what businesses, for instance, if we take that as a palette, we were going to start on where they will make a difference or give us an indication of how we could make a difference for them. that is something that we ought to be looking at. We talk a lot about how we want Wales and in South East Wales to grow, etc. But I don't. With all due respect, at the moment, I don't think we're doing it. I think what you're doing, you know, the thing with the city concept and all that sort of thing, it's huge. And these conductors and all that stuff. That's great. But there is a raft of businesses and opportunity down there that we're not getting to at all. Just not getting to at all. We don't know they exist. I mean, just one example, and I'll finish up. We've got a company in Chepstow called Imagination. I didn't even know they existed. They're down by the railway station. And the only way I got to know they existed was I had a Chinese guy who come in when I was chairman, and he wanted to become a nationalised Brit. And we went through the whole thing. I was talking to him, and I said, "Where do you come from?" And I could have thrown a stone into his back garden from where I live. And I said, what do you do? How long have you been across here? And he said, and he told me, we design microchips. And I said to him, well, who for? He said, every Apple thing that you've got, phone, anything that uses a microchip, we've designed it for them. And we don't even know that they're there. You know, and we're missing the chalk. So this is an area that I think we could do something about, and it would be a great benefit to the county. Chairman, you'll be pleased to know I've got to go, and you won't hear my dulcet tones.
Thank you for your input. Thank you for your input, David. Francis. Francis.
I think actually Councillor Dovey makes some important points there, and I think that if we are genuinely interested in the whole business of participatory democracy, we absolutely have to pick what it is that we want to engage with people on. We can't just go on and say out and ask people very general questions, because we will get very general answers that we can't do anything with. And just so a couple of things. I think we have to focus on what it is that we think is the most important. I think we also have to understand what we mean. And, you know, for example, you look at the participatory budgeting in Paris. I mean, there have been some in the UK. We don't need to go to Paris necessarily to find an example. But they're quite superficial. They're all project-based. And they're about, you know, do you want some vegetation here? Or, you know, well done, participatory budgeting has to be about directing mainstream services, and that can only really happen after a long-term piece of, you know, engagement work. And I think that's why the important thing is that this piece of work is not just for, you know, or democratic services is about the place-based stuff, what Owen does, you know, it's about the whole range of work. And we have to, I think we've talked about this a lot, we have to bring all of that together in order to determine what is it that we're going to start on, but we have to continue that, and we have to not chop and change. So we did, you know, there was Monmouthshire Engages, that, but instead of growing into understanding what wasn't working and doing something, we've sort of abandoned that, and now we're on to something else. And I think it's a bit like what public services do, which is disappointing, really, and it disappoints residents, and is one of the things that people then do not want to engage with us further. They'll say, we came a couple of times, we told you what we thought, you didn't get to use what we asked you, you know, nothing I said got used. And we don't necessarily have mechanisms in place to feed back to those people. We don't know who we need to engage with in the best way. But we have to, I think, do some work outside of these meetings to work out what it is that we want to work on and what we're going to start, and also make a commitment that we will continue in that particular vein if it's well thought out. Otherwise, I don't think this is something that we can consider. I also think we have to realise how resource intensive that is if you want to do it well. and either make provision for that or understand that we can't do it particularly well. And we need to work within our our constraints and parameters. I think sometimes we start off and we don't really work out what are the parameters of this. Is it really sustainable to have like chief officers going out to meetings here, there and everywhere? It probably isn't, and we need to understand that. And it's also, I think, as much as the council going out, and our Bevan Health Board have got people going out all the time, and our Bevan engages. Well, the things that they're talking to people about concern us as well. So, for example, reduction in beds for, long-term care, and all of those things are things that impact on the services we provide and the communities that we provide services to. So, to a certain extent, I think it's not just about the council deciding what its priorities are. I think it's about much more looking towards, if they are the right places, if they're developed enough, what the public service board and what those wider partnerships are telling us as well. So I think it's a bit more of a job. It's really good to have the discussion here, but I think there's a place perhaps outside of this. My suggestion is there's a place outside of this where some members meet with officers to bat about some of the ideas and some of the priorities that are coming out from our wider work, because otherwise I think we'll be navel gazing and we'll be working on things we cannot really make a big inroad to. I think long gone are the days where councils could do everything or thought they could do everything. This is much more now about a public service model where because people don't care who delivers their service, they just want things done. So, sorry, that's my contribution to it. But it's really good to have this info. But then on the other hand, if you look at flat pack democracy in Monmouth and what it's delivered, what you had there, whether you agree with it, don't agree with it, is you had a range of people who were working on grassroots community things. So we need a park. The people working on the park eventually thought, we're really frustrated with the way this town council is working. I'm not making any comment on that. I've never been to Monmouth Town Council. They were frustrated with the way it was working, and they said, well, we're going to stand up and be counted. So they did, and that's brought about a change. I don't know what that looks like because I've not been there. But the link between participatory democracy and formal elected democracy is really well illustrated in those particular examples, because then what you have are normal people, going about their business, and they go, oh, well, I'm really frustrated, I can't make a change here, these people are just putting every kind of block in my way, so damn it, I'm going to stand for election and I'm going to try and make some change myself. And that's mainly probably born out of frustration, but it does demonstrate that usually people who get involved in their communities sometimes go on to, other forms of elected. In this particular case, and the most interesting is they didn't choose to go through a political party, an established mainstream political party per se either. And I think those have implications for the next, for the white paper as well, those particular, this discussion. So anyway, that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Francis.
Chair, thanks. In fact, this links indirectly with a matter following in the agenda, the Bryn y Cwm pilot scheme, about how you're going to operate the pilot scheme, how you're going to communicate with the public, and what you're going to get out of it. So we'll discuss that in due course.
Peggy, do you want to think about it?
Yeah, I just I don't disagree with anything Councillor Taylor said there, and I think you're right. We have learned from some of the not mistakes we've made in the past, but you're right. We judge something to be one way, it changes, and sometimes we don't always flex and adapt with that. We just that's perennial in public service, isn't it? Don't like that, so I'm going to start something new. And you're right. Resources and some of the issues that we know are playing out contextually mean we can't do everything, so we've got to be really choosy about what it is we do decide to do. But equally, I'm aware that we've got dozens of departments that are all engaging in different ways, have all got different processes, and that, there needs to be some synergy here and some better alignment. So I agree with the suggestion, whether it's some more survey work, whether we get out and about, whether we make more use of Made Open for challenges and to talk to community. we do need some better information to be working with to be able to prioritise. So I don't think it's a task and finish style group, because I think we've done away with those because they're not always the best use of time. But if we are able to get together as perhaps a small group and say, right, okay, what is the evidence telling us? Last time we heard about the wellbeing assessment and the people of Monmouthshire telling us what matters. Perhaps if we can look at that information in better detail and then perhaps figure out how we can support the Cabinet member on a particular theme or issue that this committee wants to make some clear progress against in the next 12 months or so.
Thank you. You all happy with that, members?
How are we going to decide which particular issue we focus on? And I think I just want to agree with Francis's comments as well about the need to just do something small but do it really well rather than try to do the big scope. Because as she pointed out, where we've seen big changes in participation like Monmouth Town Council, or even on the slides earlier, Blaenau y Gwent, where the council turned over, which I suspect was also down to another failure, that of recycling, which is a big issue. Let's try and make the participation on the basis of something good and not as a reaction to a perceived failure.
Yeah, my light is on. And Matt and I were just discussing, I think we did present at the last meeting the outcomes of that wellbeing assessment, the 1,600 plus responses that we received from our public on the issues that matter most. So if my memory serves me correctly, housing was a big issue, particularly affordable housing. If we're going to keep young people, transport, particularly in a rural context, was a massive issue. Access to green spaces and areas in which people can improve their well-being, access the natural countryside, the natural environment. That was another big issue. So there's plenty of stuff for us to be working with. But I think Councillor Howard's right. We've got to pick something which isn't necessarily an easy win, but something that we can make a real impact into that will have a positive outcome for communities. We've got to build up that trust and engagement as we go along, haven't we? Not with something that comes about as a result of a problem or that people are narked about, because it just means we're not always dealing with the root causes, we're just dealing with the symptomatic stuff, and I think we've got to try and move away from that.
Francis.
And I do wonder, so if we have that information and then, if we look at we have to triangulate, I suppose, some of the key things that are coming. So there's the wellbeing assessment, and then there are some other key areas that we know. And I think if we were to do that and also consider, for example, what's coming back from an Iron Bevan University Health Board engages, what's coming back from the PCC when he's engaging with communities, and then really look at that and work with others to develop an approach, then it would seem to me that might be more logical and also a better use of resources. Because arguably when we're talking about engagement, in Gwent, we should perhaps be at a position eventually where we've got a team, teams that are working across these areas. If we've got a desire, we are being pushed towards, and we have a desire to have, effective single public services.
And if I just come in on that point, just very briefly, I mean, we do have a participation and engagement group, which we're all of the engagement professionals from the different public bodies and the voluntary sector come together. So you mentioned an Iron Bevan engages, Julian and Claire, they come in and we meet with them so we understand what's happening there. But also I think the importance, as you rightly say, of some of that work is we can share those resources. So when we go out and we did the engagement around the wellbeing assessment, it wasn't always Monmouthshire Council staff. Sometimes it was staff from the PCC, sometimes it was staff from an Iron Bevan, and then we share that intelligence. And you're absolutely right. We can't afford to all be doing this separately. We have to share the intelligence and we have to share the resources to do the work. So I think we can bring some of that learning, not just from the wellbeing assessment, but those other areas. The doorstep survey that Kelly mentioned earlier, the intelligence from other sort of areas, such as work we've been doing on budget analysis. And then some of the work that's coming forward that Cabinet members are prioritising, such as Councillor Jordan's priorities that he mentioned earlier on. And said, look, these are our opportunities. This is where the evidence is taking us. Which one of those do you want to look at and focus in and specialise on as a committee?
Thank you. Are you all happy that's the way we're going to go forward then? Right? Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah. The report's there really just to give you a try and paint the picture for you of what different scenarios of timings of council meetings will look like. It's the first time it's come to Democratic Services. I think it normally goes to council, and what tends to happen at council is we get 43 different options for the timing of the start of a council meeting. So we're going to bring it to Democratic Services to try and get the committee to put a recommendation forward to council on what the most suitable time to start the full council meeting is. It's only full council we're considering here, not selects, not any other committees. They can be managed through themselves. This is just for full council. The options I've given you of 10, 2, 4 and 7 o'clock are just there because that's what the previous consultation was based on. If you want to propose 9, 8 o'clock in the morning, it's entirely up to you. Really, this is just to put to yourselves and open up the floor and let you put your thoughts forward and hopefully come up with something that we can put to council as a recommendation and consult all councillors on before it actually goes to council.
And I think this is a good time to be discussing this because of the early diaries. And there has been some concerns over the last couple of months of meetings being crashed, seminars being pushed in, and it's been making it a full working day for members when they got children and they got other commitments, and they couldn't take part in the seminars or they couldn't take part in the meetings on the committees they was in. So I think we need to discuss this and put our thoughts so it can go back to the next council or to the council meetings to get it rectified. Francis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, we may very well end up talking about this for a long time, but I just wanted to make a fairly straightforward proposal. I think that you're quite right, you know, people have got different circumstances, different situations, but for me it's about, you know, I think I made the proposal last time, it's about our approach, our attitude and our ability to understand and to recognise that people have got different situations. I'm not in particular thinking, you know, that we've got members with caring responsibilities, members with full-time jobs, members with, you know, health issues, aware of that. So I think my proposal would be that we do, as we've done before, 3 or 4, whatever the ratio is, council meetings in the summer, so between April and July, where we meet at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever. So it enables those people in particular in full-time work to have at least 3 or 4 full council meetings that they don't have to, you know, juggle their day for so much. So my suggestion would be between April and July we have. I don't count the AGM as a council meeting as such because it's like half an hour and a sandwich. So I would say 4 council meetings between April and July. That's my proposal. I leave it to other members to either agree or disagree with me.
Can I just say I agree with Francis. As someone who's is committed to working full-time hours, every time I'm in here, I then have to work on later with a 6 or 7 o'clock start. If we varied it, that would allow me a few months of working a full day, then coming here and finally getting home.
Giles?
Yeah, I agree with the same principle. But we're not going to get a solution that suits everybody. Personally speaking, I'd just like it so there's a little bit of fairness, so that I don't have to use up annual leave or civic duty leave, which is finite, to attend meetings. It's just really difficult. And I think perhaps I'd go a step further and say that they ought to be rotated every other meeting between, say, 2 and 4 or 2 and 5. Okay, I get the bit about winter nights are a bit dark and miserable, but they're no more dark and miserable if you've got other responsibilities or other meetings to go to, or if you've got to drive to or from work. It's just one of those things. So my proposal would be an amendment to Francis, so that we alternate between, or recommend to council that we alternate between meetings between either 2 and 5 or 2 and 4, whichever members prefer.
Can I make a suggestion as well? And accepting that obviously attendance of members is the principal issue here, but again, going back to some more survey work, when we've got the live stream, could we ask some questions of our public who are watching? So would you be more inclined to watch, turn up, maybe attend a public forum if a meeting was at 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock? The other consideration here is not just about members' attendance. What makes it most likely for our public to engage in the democratic process? We could at least ask, a question. What would I come perhaps and participate in a public forum, which means you have to walk down the front and stand up? Well, we won't know until we ask the question. So I think we've got to take the opportunity in this discussion to keep that theme of democratic engagement as a thread through what we're doing and talking about.
Francis.
I was just going to say, I think actually we probably need to do far more about encouraging people, actually putting notices out, encouraging people to ask questions, and asking people to come in and use this space as they wish. And I can't think that we've had very few, maybe 2 or 3 in 5 or 6 years, where the public, somebody from the public has come in and given us a presentation or interacted with us. And I think we all have a job to do a bit more about that. Members and officers, and using our council's kind of public relations type, we could do that a bit more. And I think you can ask people, would they be more inclined? But my own experience, and I don't know, is that if people have got something they really want to come and tell us, whether that's planning committee or whatever, they will. But we don't really make it very nice or helpful, or so I think we've got a bit more to do about that. And in particular, when we come on to our next, the item where we're looking at, the electoral reform, I think there's a whole piece of work there. There's a whole piece, isn't there, around increasing access to and information and learning around democratic and political processes, so we can enable our young people, if that is the way things progress, to make well-informed judgments when they go out to the ballot box, or not the ballot box, the button, or whatever it may be in the future.
Thank you. If we're talking about timings for meetings, sorry to go back to that point previously, could we also consider maybe having a full council meeting that starts at 11 o'clock in the morning? That would give people a chance to have a members' meeting for an hour before. Then all of our full council meetings are timed so that they will automatically interfere with parents picking up children from school. And so we always have to arrange something to do with childcare, because a 2 o'clock meeting, you can't do a 3 o'clock school run. So if we could also have, maybe if we were doing a rotation, could we also have some which maybe started in the morning as well, or put that to consideration?
Any other? Sorry.
Yeah, I think as a general principle, the demographics of this council is quite different from the last council, because I think the last council there were far more retired people. This council there are far more working people, and I think we've got to have an arrangement whereby everybody is inconvenienced as equally as possible. And that's really what it boils down to, isn't it? You're not going to please everybody all the time. Somebody's going to be inconvenienced. And I think the only way to do it is to have variable starting times. And it's up to you, or the members, to decide when they finish.
Should we draw a recommendation then to council along the lines of 4 summer meetings at 5 o'clock, and we'll look at alternating the remaining meetings at 2 and 11, and we agenda it for 12 months time and see what stats we can get out, questions put at different times, attendance levels, and maybe look at it in 12 months time again. You in agreement? That was what I picked up on. Yes. Yeah, if that's what's coming from. I think it's 10. Yeah.
Can I fetch children, please?
I think I've got to agree with Councillor John. I think at the end of the day, we've got to have variation. It's going to be inconvenient. I'm not afraid of driving back home in the dark because I've got lights in the car, you know. But at the end of the day, if you factor in, you know, people who've got young children, you know, starting later would mean like, difficult to have childcare. People who are working, it's difficult. At the end of the day, there's no way you're going to please everybody. Personally, I've got no strong axe to grind because I have retired. But you know, I think we've got to go for some variation pattern, and then see who screams the loudest.
11, 2 and 5 then, is we'll put as the recommendation, and we'll consult all members on that as well.
If it's a recommendation to council, so we're proposing to have 11 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock and then 5 o'clock. So for example, where are we now? September. So the next one would be 11, then 2, then 5.
Once they've adopted the decision, we'll start at 11, 2 and 5.
I mean, I just wonder really, and I got no, as I say, I have got strong feelings about it, but I haven't, because I think, you know, you've got to have a degree of fairness or unfairness to everybody. But I do think, because the issue seems, or certainly was, you know, and I agree with you about the school thing as well, is that if you don't set a cultural approach, which means that you can be flexible. That's my problem. I really don't want to go to full council and have a debate for 3 hours about actually why it's a pain to come in at whatever time. I think we've got to be quite clear. And if we think about it, whenever you do anything, it's inconvenient for childcare, frankly, to be honest with you. But that's, you know, sort of, you know, you're inconvenienced. But it was more really, I think, for those in work, taking annual leave in particular, and I've got childcare responsibilities as well. But whatever time you set it, it's a nuisance. Really, it just is. So again, I'm not really bothered, but I'd rather come out with you with something a bit clearer, really, because I just worry we'll go to full council and we'll end up with, again, what you started off by saying is 43 different views on when we're going to meet. So that, you know, can we not just tighten that up a bit, members? You know, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Is it just variation? So between the three, 11, 2, 5. Is it that we want to start early at 11 o'clock in the morning? And then have 5 o'clock, so we got 5 meetings at 11 and 5 meetings at 5 o'clock, so we suit, what is it do we want to achieve? I just think the more variation you have, the more scope you have for complaining, and we'll end up back at 2 o'clock. So that's just, you know, my pushback to everybody. Can we not just be clearer? What do we want, you know?
Can I fetch the cabinet member in, please?
Yeah.
I think with 11, 2 and 5, those who are working are going to be inconvenienced by the 11 and the 2 o'clock.
Yes.
They'll only have the advantage of the 5 o'clock.
I agree.
Those who've got children are going to be inconvenienced by probably the 2, definitely the 5. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is, which is I don't, which is why I, you know, for childcare purposes, if I'm just thinking about that, prefer 2 and 5, because at least you know where you are. But for working, I think, yeah, it's a nightmare. 11 o'clock, you can't do anything before 11 o'clock, and you can't do anything much after 11 o'clock, you know, by the time. Whereas at least in the 2 o'clock, like if you were meeting at 9, then you could potentially go to work in the afternoon. But do you know what I mean? So but then if you were meeting at 9, you wouldn't get here for childcare.
Perhaps you've got a hybrid vote. Those who don't care what time they come don't vote. And leave it to those who are actually affected by it.
Yeah, but then you'll end up with the majority, and the majority of people are in this. Well, I don't know now, but the majority of people always were those that were retired, could come at any time, and preferred to come early and go home.
Chair, can I'll amend my previous proposal then and based on the fact that we want to try and inconvenience working people and those who do don't matter equally. And okay, I take the point that 11 and 2 is disproportionate, so perhaps we ought to stick then and try a year at 2 and 5 and alternate between the 2 and drop the 11. Sorry, Joe, but also make sure that it's on the agenda for the same time next year, so that if we want to try a morning meeting, perhaps we can.
Perhaps we should think of Saturday at 8 o'clock in the morning. Get it over with all up. Pardon? What you've got you've got a nursery down there. No, come on, let's be serious now. So what?
So we're alternating between 2 and 5. That's our proposal for full council.
Right.
Yeah, this one was just a short note from me, because I know we've discussed the local government white paper previously, Resilient and Renewed, and John has done a great summary for us before. We've had several discussions. I think we all know where it is now in terms of it's in the queue to get onto the legislature, and we've had some dates and indications around that. It was really just to let the committee know that I've been to one meeting of what is called the Local Government Reform Task and Finish Group. I think there's about 7 of us, so chief executives from across Wales. And our first meeting really was to agree some terms of reference and to agree a strong purpose for the steering group. I think my contribution to that meeting was that it's all very well to talk about form and footprint, but really we have to think about the fundamental purpose and function of local government, and we can't really do that until we understand, our counties and our communities and what's going on in society. We can't just assume we're legitimate and that people want us around. We have to work for that privilege and that purpose. So just to let you know, the outcome of that meeting, and I've got another one this week, is that they're convening some task and finish groups which will report in to the overarching steering group, which I sit as part of, which will report to the Minister, to the Cabinet Secretary, I should say. And there are some technical groups that will inform that work. So there'll be one on finance, looking at issues of viability and sustainability of services. There's one around governance and accountability. But importantly, and I think that the thing that Monmouthshire influenced was that, thinking fundamentally about the purpose of local government is not a technical challenge. It's an emotional and a purpose-driven one. So we're going to have a group on, research and development, new ways of working, thinking really, really closely about the function that we want to play as local government in the future. Because I think the point that I was trying to reinforce at the meeting was that this isn't just about collaboration for collaboration's sake. It isn't just about combining and aggregating services, because if you've got something over there that's suboptimal at a local level and you just join that up times 10, it could be suboptimal at a regional level unless something fundamentally gives. So just thinking about some of the things that we're going to see in the future, how that could impact the ways in which public services are run, and thinking much more radically about some of the opportunities that we have to reshape what we do and to fundamentally rewrite what we do, because doing the same old things slightly better and tweaking a bit is clearly not what we're about. We can't be about that, otherwise we won't achieve some of the fundamental aims. So I'll share more information with you ongoing. I do think we've got quite a good opportunity to influence the picture, and I think what I'm hoping to bring to the table is that this is all about mindset and culture. Culture is what we grow people in local government, and as I say, it's not just collaboration for collaboration's sake, because that's just a form and footprint issue. And yes, that's still important, but it's not the primary driver of what we do in local government. That has to come from our people and our communities. So I'll keep you posted. I'll share the information, Chair, on the terms of reference and on some of the advisory groups that will underpin it. And then obviously if there are issues and matters that I can feed in, I'd be very happy to do that. But I think it's important that we have a voice at the table, and we certainly do.
Thank you. Perhaps when you get this information, instead of fetching it to the committee meetings, you could share it in between.
Yes, of course I will, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, the next one is the Welsh Government consultation. You can take that, John.
Under the Wales Act, the Welsh Assembly have been devolved powers to legislate for elections within Wales. They'll cover the Assembly and local government. This is their first stab at the consultation, only focusing on local government elections. It's wide-ranging, it asks a lot of questions, potentially proposes a lot of changes, some good. And I just brought it to the committee really to make you aware of it. We will be making a response to it. And it's just allowing you opportunity to feed in. I don't intend to take us through every single question because we will be here all night. But if someone's got some important points they want to raise, either raise them here in the committee and we'll incorporate that into a response, or by all means email them through to me and we'll put that in. And with your agreement, I'll draft a response and get it agreed with the chair, and we'll send that off and circulate it to everybody.
We've talked this afternoon about the importance of getting communities involved and knowing what our communities think about things. And to me, one of the most exciting elements of this discussion is the possibility of lowering the voting age to 16-year-olds. And in terms of that interesting discussion about community involvement, I wonder if, for example, the youth service would have seen the cuts it's seen if 16-year-olds had been involved in that discussion. I can remember a few years ago now, I didn't actually vote for the first time until I was 23 years old, because when my 21st birthday came and I got the vote, it was then 2 years in the local elections before I could use it. I could have joined the army and killed people when I was 16, but I couldn't actually vote for a say in my community until I was 23. I think that if you can join the armed services at 16, you should be able to vote at 16. I think that this is a very exciting new development, and I've made the point earlier this afternoon when the Chief Exec was with us about the current educational drive to get young people involved in thinking about the nature of their communities, and being effective participants in their communities. And we see lots of examples of how, as elected representatives, we can support democracy in schools. I think another key element of that is actually saying, right, we can tell you about democracy, and actually you're old enough to take part in democracy as well. And so if there's any element of this discussion, I think we should positively support it's lowering the voting age to 16.
Could I propose that we have an all-member seminar on this, because it's going to affect all members and everybody's going to have a view on this, and then before this committee actually sends a response to Welsh Government?
It reinforces a point that Councillor Howard made earlier about having some kind of bulletin or round robin that, you know, I know we all saw this stuff on the news, but brings to people's attention that this is out as a consultation piece so we can have that feedback. But going back to Councillor Graucott's points, which is a really important one around engaging young people, we do have an Engage to Change forum, which the Youth Service convenes and helps support and facilitates. It's very much led by the young people. They shape it and run it. But rather than, you know, this committee just devise a response which is shared, you know, maybe we could do some active engagement around this and ask them to come along and talk about it, because it is going to affect them principally, or so it seems. And it would be really good to hear from them and to sort of enshrine some of that feedback genuinely and authentically in our response to Welsh Government.
Giles.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Paul's view that we need a wider debate on this. But again, it's one that's likely to be more controversial than the one about what time we should meet, because 37 odd questions there. I mean, instantly, I disagree with Martin about the age of consent for voting. Reason being, I think he's inaccurate what he says about joining the army and being able to kill. I don't think you can see active service until later. But then you could make the same argument. Well, okay, you're old enough to kill somebody. You're not old enough to drive there and do it, and you're certainly not old enough to have a drink afterwards to try and get over it. So that there's so many anomalies. And the other thing then, why 16? Why not 15? What is the judgment we're making about age? It's almost a little bit patronising in a way, isn't it? Are we saying that at 16 you must have the mental capability to be able to distinguish between all the various people standing for election and various policies to be able to make that difference? Why not 14? Why not 12? You could go on, and I'd like to know why it was set at 18 in the first place, but I do agree that there are so many odd age limit things, the get married thing as well. It ought to be a little more. What's what I'm looking for? It ought to be one age or the other, not have all the different age groups for various things.
Thank you, Giles.
I was only going to say if Martin was 16 or 17 and committed a criminal offence, he would appear in a youth court and not the Crown Court.
I think it's important to also look how they're being taught it in schools at the moment. My understanding is that you're only taught at PSE, and I still think that's not in depth enough to help children, because you are talking about children here who are impressionable by social media. Have they actually got a full understanding of what they're voting?
Francis?
I think it's really important that we do develop a response. I'd made a lot of notes, but if you do, I mean, a huge amount of views on the voting age, but that, there are lots of other issues in here, but, voting age, well, we can talk about that all day, but, age of consent, do people know enough about sex at 16? But, that is the legal age of consent. You can't drive a car until you're 17. There's all sorts of things we might want to, I'm not saying we want to include that in our response, but I think these are probably quite personal views, aren't they? In terms of the age, but there are much where we might all have a view, and we have to come to a council view, I suppose, on that. But in terms of some of the wider issues like automatic registration, the duties on the what's it? It's not the returning officer. It's the registration officer. That's it. The registration officer. Whether we want to encourage or we want to support multiple ways of voting, and the implications of that. Do we need to, it was saying, it keeps talking about sending out polling cards still, and I was like, well, don't we need to send a response saying, well, actually, is that necessary? Do we not need a better way of communicating with people about voting? So I think we do need to have a proper council response to this, because there are some really important issues here, notwithstanding that the return date is the 10th of October. So if you did want to have a council seminar, then that would have to be really soon in order to, like next week, to allow officers to develop a response from that. But I think that it would probably be important to just get some views from the Democratic Services Committee, which then probably should, inform a seminar if there is one, or that we have a response to council, but council is next week, isn't it? In fact, the papers will be going out tomorrow, aren't they? So we don't have do you know what I mean? We haven't got a council, anything to send out to people to stimulate a discussion at full council aside from so I'm not sure. I leave it to officers to count back from the day when it's got to be sent in. Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of, what has to happen when for things to get approved and signed off. But I do think, and then, talking about the way of voting, changing from first past the post, should each local authority decide which way it wants to vote? I mean, I think those are really fundamental issues. I mean, I would personally say that, no, the whole of Wales should vote in the same way. Otherwise, it's becomes really difficult. But, that's, again, a personal view. But the council has to come to a view. So what my proposal is that officers tell us what we need to do to form a response, a council response,
Well,
ready to send in.
That's why it's come here.
Yeah.
Timescales are tight with August recess, and
I'm happy to. I think it's really important. We do have to discuss it. But
and we can always put a response in as Democratic Services Committee, not necessarily as a council response, and individual councillors can respond to it themselves as well to feed in their own views, because not everybody's going to necessarily agree on what we're doing. That's why it's here. I agree we should be, given how wide-scaping it is, it'd be better for us as a committee to have come up with a view on some of these questions to present to a seminar if we go down the seminar route, just to guide it, because again you can have 43 different opinions on 43 different topics and it's just going to become unwieldy again. I think perhaps the best option is to ask members if they got any input they want to make on specific questions, email them through to me. I'll draft up a response, and in the meantime, if we can get a seminar in, even if it's close to the October deadline, then we'll look to do so. But at least we've got something to start the conversation off with, rather than just leading questions, I suppose.
should we just go through the main headings now, then, perhaps, rather than every,
Is it easy, unless members have got something specific? Specific details might be better just email through to me so I can collate a response with the chair, and then we'll circulate it and share it around to everybody. I'd say that's the easiest way, just because of the amount of detail that's actually entailed in it. What I will add, just as one final point on it, is in your responses you really need to bear in mind that this is just for local elections. Yes. If you had 2 elections on the same day, you're going to have 2 completely different sets of rules. And we don't have an answer to what they're intending to do on that. And that's an important issue.
Yeah, it was just a point. I mean, given that the timescales and the amount of information John's going to have to deal with, and the diversity of views, just reflecting on what's happened in the past when you've given council responses into large consultation documents, that actually in many cases, this is the response is simply the council does not have a unanimous view on this issue. Because, the voting age is an example, you won't reach a consensus on that. There will not be a single agreed response on some of these issues. So actually, the response itself may be slightly shorter than the volume of correspondence that it generates, and a number of these questions may not have an agreed position which you could reach a unanimous verdict on.
Right, Francis?
For example, though, you see the issue, isn't it? The issue is wider than the question, isn't it? So, it talks about the age that you should be able to vote. Well, actually, it doesn't matter where you're 16, 17 or 18. The issue is, underlying that, is appropriate, as Lisa says, support for young people, and older people, frankly, to access information about democratic processes and the political system, and partly that some of that responsibility lies with, for example, this committee. So, how will they strengthen, these kind of functions to enable people to make better informed decisions, and then, I don't want to get it. I won't ask what people think about whether prisoners should vote, because, we could be here for quite some time. But I think the and the issue of block registrations, so these are really quite controversial issues. So, I mean, I would, I'll give you my views, but they are, they're not debated views, are they? And sometimes actually listening to a debate cannot fundamentally, change your mind, but you hear other people with different views and you think, oh, actually, yeah, now I've heard that, I think that's the benefit of having a proper debate, isn't it, or a proper seminar. But I do think that this business of Welsh Government, almost like, so they've made a decision that they're going to go. They've signed up. They always wanted to get 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. So at some point, presumably that will happen when they get that power of competence. But things like, should each principal council be able to choose the way it votes? I think that's them abdicating responsibility a bit there, and I think that there should be, a single prescribed, whatever that system should be, prescribed, and it should be applicable in the whole of Wales. Otherwise, that's incredibly confusing and also difficult, I would have thought, to manage across such a small principality, if people vote different, one side of a border to another. So I think that's quite ridiculous. But there, there's but I think, you've got to be in favour of the progress, but with sufficient checks and balances. Like, yes, it wouldn't be great to see other means of voting apart from going to a polling station to encourage more people to vote, because that's the whole basis of it, isn't it? But again, you have to have a degree of check and balance, don't you, to make sure that that's sensible.
So can we agree then that independent individuals put his emails, John, with what they think, and then we call a seminar as quickly as possible, right? So then John got something to work on when he calls the seminar. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Item 12 is work programme and frequency of meetings. This afternoon has been a busy afternoon, and we've been told we got a lot more going to be thrown at us. So the next meeting is suggested the 4th of December. Can we say we have a meeting in between now and the 4th of December to relieve some of these, the length of the times of the meetings? And how do officers feel about that?
Sorry, is that again, Chair?
I was suggesting that we have a meeting in between now and the 4th of December, because of the workload we're going to have in front of us, and then we have them every 6 weeks or something like that, up until April, May. Do you agree with that? Yeah. Yes. Do you want to say something?
I agree with that, and I think in terms of the workload, and when meetings get long, by the end, then people are getting tired, and then it's not so effective, and there have been important issues today, and for example, that survey, which has been useful to raise, but I think in reality, surely democracy is at the heart of the whole process, and therefore, not that we have meetings every 5 minutes, but we have perhaps more frequent meetings, but which aren't quite as long and probably will be more effective.
And sorry, Jones.
Just to say, Chair, I'm happy to leave it in your hands to discuss with officers, and depending on how the agenda shapes up, for you to call the meeting and give us notice, and we'll attend.
Thank you. And we'll go back to some of the suggestions that's been made here this afternoon. In between meetings, we can get out and meet the public. You happy with that? Right, thank you very much. So the next meeting is in Knockbloomby. To be agreed. Right, thank you very much for your time. It's 2.5 hours we've been here, and it's been an interesting meeting. There's a lot of work coming our way, and there's a lot of work which this is where to be done. But this is where continuity comes into it. You need to be coming to, if possible, to every meeting, and that's not just us members. That's officers, our cabinet member. Because it is important to have their input. Without their input, we can go along, but we can only just go on what we know. So we need to have the continuity of officers coming to give us updates and help us as well, and our cabinet member as well. So thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon.
Yeah, you? You had your appointment now?
I had it last Wednesday.
Good.
They want to do a level puncture, which then they take fluid off the spine to check the colour. It doesn't know what's causing it. So more tests. But he is, I'm seeing Dr. Anderson. So I'm going to for Friday. I wasn't feeling too well, I felt a bit sluggish and just